I'm going to give you what I learned from the first Super Major of 11th edition, and that is that rolling to hit is bullshit. So today we are reviewing the first Super Major of 11th edition. Now it is a week on since that happened, and this is all that I learned from playing at that tournament. Now, some of you might have seen that my list has been featured on Allspecs Tactics and a couple of other places in general, so do feel free to go and check out to see how some of the other lists also got on, but this one was a big, solid performance for the Salamanders. So without further ado, let's get straight into the list, because there's a heck of a lot to learn from this video, so you are going to want to stick around to see how 11th edition has so dramatically changed to 10th. So the list: Forge, Fathers, Seekers, and Librarius in the Recon Disposition. So, for those that don't know, Forge Fathers gives all of your guns Assault. It also gives you +1 strength if you are within 12 inches of your target when you are shooting. And there's a couple of other cute bits that you get from Forge Fathers, things like Advance and Action, or Shoot and Action with Infernus Marines, which is pretty damn good when you've got 20 of them, and then some other cute little bits that you can get from it, so like an additional +1 to wound. You can turn all of your flamers into dev weapons, which is rather terrifying, and that's going to come up a lot later. Now this is the Salamanders specific detachment, so we are definitely leaning into those flamers. Now we paired that with Librarius because we are looking for that critical mass of dev wound output, and that comes from the Sternguard with the Librarian with Fusilade. Now what that gives us is, if we are in the Pyrokinesis discipline, which we basically always are, we get an extra AP if we are within 12 inches of the target we are shooting. Are you seeing a theme here? Then what Fusilade gives us is anti-vehicle, anti-monster 5 up, and then sustained hits if we're in Pyrokinesis. Now, with that ability, the Sternguard kind of pop off because they all have dev wounds on their guns, and they're re-rolling their wounds into the Oath of Moment target, which is pretty damn efficient for making sure that you're killing whatever is in front of you. Now you couple that with Vulkan He'stan, who has had an insane glow up from 10th edition, where this model, it's almost like he's written for 11th, because he is a single infantry 40mm base that when he gets to his objective is 10 OC, can be nicely hidden, uses ability to sort of view something within 24 inches, point at it, and then suddenly all torrent and melter weapons are re-rolling their wound. And if you remember, I mentioned how you could turn your guns into dev wounds. That is a pretty damn good combo. So Vulkan's vibing around solo because he's survivable enough, because with a 4-up Feel No Pain as well when he's on his special objective, it is so difficult to shift him, especially when he's never really shooting. He's just pointing at targets and keeping that 12-inch hidden if you're keeping him behind some dense terrain, which you definitely should be. As mentioned, we've got the Librarian with Fusilade, and that's the 10 Sternguard with all of that dev wound output. And obviously a 4-up invuln, because they needed that, because Librarians just give you a 4-up invuln. Not as if that's like one of the best things as we go into 11th edition. Then we've got another Librarian with 10 Infernus. And this one, they've got Temporal Corridor, which is an enhancement that we get out of Librarius. Now, this enhancement allows us to up and down the Infernus. We can also switch which psychic detachment we are in to then give us deep strike on this unit, but in all honesty, most of the time they're pretty happy coming in from strategic reserve. But in all honesty, this enhancement for 15 points is completely stupid. It is an exceptional enhancement, especially when up-down abilities have become so much more impactful. So Librarian with Corridor, honestly, I was shocked just how good this was at making sure that I could dictate the pace of the game and work out where I wanted to have those fights. Then bog standard Librarian with 10 Infernus. They would be riding in a Land Raider Redeemer, one of two, alongside the Librarian with Fusilade and the Sternguard riding in another one. Now, this Redeemer, having 2 Redeemers is brutal, but having one of those Redeemers have Infernus and Vulkan in is setting up that combo to be able to go wherever I really need to really punish our opponent. And if the Infernus don't manage to dev wound the target to death, you can be sure that that Redeemer directly behind it with all of those Flamestorm cannons is going to brutally murder whatever is directly in front of it. Now, we've also got a combi lieutenant, because why wouldn't we? But now's the little bit of extra sauce. This is a jump captain with the immolator enhancement and 10 Vanguard vets armed with hand flamers. So the jump captain with immolator is a really interesting one because he gives every torrent weapon +1 attack when they fire. So you're essentially rolling 11d6 plus 11, and with his ability to reduce the cost of each of those stratagems by 1, that 2 CP stratagem to go dev wound with all flamer weapons can suddenly be 1 CP. And that is absolutely brutal. That can really change the pace of the game. And it gives you something really nice and fast, good little rapid ingress target as well, because you can free rapid ingress with the same captain ability, and you can just put that pressure on your opponent. It also gives you a solid combat threat as well, because that was the thing I was finding that I was lacking a little bit. I needed something that had that little bit of punch to take me out of being a single monophase army, and that's really where the Vanguard vets carved their space. As we mentioned, we've got the 2 Land Raider Redeemers. How I'm able to fit 2 Land Raider Redeemers in this list boggles my mind. They are incredible. I feel like every Space Marine list I write at the moment has at least 1 in because they're just so powerful. 2d6 plus 6, strength 7 in this detachment. AP2, damage flat 2 shots with torrent is vile. The output of these flamers, especially if you can combo them with the +1 to wound stratagem or with oath, will just decimate any target in front of them. I was so impressed with how reliable those Redeemers are, because also they offer some critical survivability. 2-up saves might have got a little bit worse, but in all honesty, that T12 feels significantly better in 11th edition. Next, we've got a land speeder and some scouts. These guys are for doing missions. The land speeder, it goes 14 and has assault, so it can potentially go 20 and then move, shoot, move. It's really nippy, really fast for those positional secondaries. And also it takes something relevant to come out and kill it, because it is still T8 and has 9 wounds, so you can't just like bolter it to death or something like that. You've got to bring out something meaningful. And if they're bringing out something meaningful to deal with a land speeder, that sets up the rest of the army to bully those key units that can kill T8 stuff, which is very damn useful. Then scouts, usually, to be honest, they were screening my backfield because the up-down ability that they've got, I think the rules have very much changed with how we play scouts. Originally, I would usually infiltrate them and then scout backwards, but obviously you can't do that anymore. So what I do with them is I usually start them on my backfield objective, just screening that backfield out, and then they up down and go and cause havoc towards the end of the game, especially if you've got something in recon like score your opponent's home objective or go in all 4 quarters. It just gives you another up-down ability for 65 points, which is just really very solid. Then finally, we've got my personal favourite part of the list that is not like the uber damage bricks, and that's the Eradicators with heavy bolters. For a mere 70 points, the output of these guys is sensational. They put so much pressure on your opponent. I was constantly impressed with how many models they were taking down. There was more than a few games where they would, honestly, the difference between winning and losing, because they were able to snipe out problems with that long-range bolter fire, and also they could just go and try and mow down chaff units. As soon as your opponent puts like a 10 brick of Space Marines in front of you, shooting at them with just 70 points of Eradicators with heavy bolters, that's 15 heavy bolter shots. And especially if you can get them heavy, so they're hitting on 2s, usually up to 3s because of cover, that is a nightmare for your opponent to deal with. So that's the list. I was really looking forward to this tournament. And in all honesty, we got to pairings and I get the message going, "Oh, Tobes, bad luck, mate." So that was always going to be spicy. So not something that you quite expect to see at your first tournament of 11th edition, especially the first Super Major, is going up round 1 against the greatest of all time, Manny Chima. But unfortunately, that's exactly what I had. However, I had a brief reprieve of execution where unfortunately Manny wasn't able to make the tournament, so I went over to the stall to go and get repaired, and I get repaired into none other than Steve Box from Vanguard Tactics. We kind of look at each other and go, how on earth has this happened when we were getting a repair? And it was kind of a moment where we weren't really sure what the next steps were, but there we were, and we had to go and play. So Steve was on his Sisters of Battle Take and Hold list, which is using Army of Faith plus the character detachment. And essentially, what that army is looking to do is make all of those sisters 2-up, 4-up, so nice and survivable. Obviously survivable for sister standards, and then also really hit people hard with that mix of castigators, heavy bolter retributors, and the more than Val unit, because as much as sisters have lost a little bit in terms of their defensive stats, they still very much have teeth. Personally, I think they are overcosted right now, and I think that that's something that Games Workshop really need to look at and sort, but you know, it's still a solid list, and being able to use 2 miracle dice on 1 unit per phase is really nice for just trying to make sure that all of those critical dice rolls go your way. But unfortunately for Steve, this was a very good matchup for the Salamanders. There is no two ways about it. When you are Strength 6 Flamers and they are a bunch of Sister T3 bodies, that is never going to end overly well. Now, I deployed my Redeemer incredibly aggressively because I went, well, if I can bait out his entire army if he goes first, then I'll then be able to sort of stage and go and hit next, because there won't be a way to go backwards after committing to kill this Redeemer. Or if I go first, I get to be uber aggressive with both of my Redeemers, stage and then hit. So it's a win-win either way. Just one of those ways was a lot more painful. Now, unfortunately, it did go the slightly more painful way, where my Redeemer had to take basically an army's activation into it on turn 1, which is not healthy for a Redeemer, I've heard. Didn't obviously, it stung quite a fair bit, but it did bring out 2 Castigators, Morvenwald's unit, the new Lethal Hits girl, and a bunch of infantry as well, which is quite handy for me. I did roll quite poorly on saves, and I lost the Redeemer before one of the Castigators had activated, which did then mean that one of the Castigators got to shoot into my Sternguard, which was not ideal. I basically then had to play the game at about 300 points down, so not really the best way to start, especially when you're going up against a player of Steve's caliber. What I would go on to do was then start trying to wrestle that pace back to me by letting that early momentum take Steve forward and then allow me to reposition and kind of dictate where that end game was going to start going, because I knew all I needed to do was kind of neuter that scoring a little bit early, not let him get too much board control, and then my reserves would come in and I would cause havoc at that point. And that was the exact plan that I executed. Now, I did get very lucky in the early game on some dice. I knew that the Retributors didn't have full back do stuff, so I decided that I'd throw some scouts into them and see if they were able to kind of get rid of some of the Retributors, just kind of hurt the unit a little bit, reduce the output, because weirdly enough, with heavy bolters and +1 to wound, those Retributors are absolutely disgusting. So I knew that I wanted to knock out a few of them, especially when they've got dev wounds from the character provided with them, and the Dialogus that auto 6s their miracle dice. So I decided to go with the scouts into them with Oath. Steve -1s to hit, and they already had the -1 to wound because of the character detachment, and I still kill all 5 of them with 3 guys. I got incredibly lucky, and Steve miracle dice 2 of the saves. I handed him 7 dice. He miracle dices 2 of them and then fails all 5 4-ups. And that kind of set the tone for Steve's dice throughout the game. Apart from that early good one into the Land Raider, there wasn't much luck on Steve's side, to be perfectly honest. At that point, I know I'm in a good position. I just have to not fall too far behind. So what I plan to do is get myself into lots of different spots where I can then engage in different areas. So I'm positioning my Redeemer in a nice little pocket so that I can then push that forward into all of his key units on the next turn, not needing to worry about it really doing much that turn, but just prepping to then push forward. He has to deal with my scouts on that turn, which I absolutely love. It allows me to kind of not lose anything overly relevant. I do lose my expansion to a Castigator sliding forward, and then there's another Castigator that stages to get ready to try and push me next turn. However, this is where my hammer blow comes in. I'm able to drop 2 units of Infernus, the Vanguard Vets, Vulkan, and the remaining Redeemer into the open, and I kill Morvenwald and friends, all of a Sister Battle unit with, not Junith, the other one, another unit of random sisters, and then 2 Castigators. And at that point, the game's over. There just wasn't enough resources at that point that could allow the sisters to fight back into the game, especially when there's still that much 4-up Invan Marine bodies just in their way. And of course, the delightful Redeemer just doing Redeemer things alongside the fact that the units that kill the Redeemer were already dead. So that one ended up being a win to me. Great game against Steve, really great guy. He was super supportive and helpful around really helping to make sure that we were getting everything right and sort of showing me some of the nuance of 11th edition. Obviously, he's had a little bit more time to kind of learn the edition and everything like that, but he was incredibly helpful with that. It is massively appreciated, and it helped me be a better player as I went forward. So big shout out to Steve, big shout out to Vanguard Tactics for that fantastic game. And obviously, because I was playing Salamanders nonsense that is far too undercosted right now, I was able to sneak that win. But quite frankly, I do think I got outplayed. Definitely a experience difference in that game, but the sheer brutality of the Salamanders was able to win through. So we go into the lunch break feeling pretty good. It's probably going to be the hardest game of the tournament out of the way. And of course, that was not to be. There was far tougher coming. So continuing on the trend of quite tough pairings, I then immediately pair into Aidan Southerly Gilmore, who tried out for Team Scotland, I'm pretty sure made the last 16, alongside also being the second top World Eater in the country in the last UKT season. So Aidan knows his stuff, and when I got to the table, I was like, okay, I feel like World Eaters is a good matchup for me. I think a lot of World Eaters players have been quite negative in terms of what they are working with, but there's a little bit of spice to this new Khorne Demon Kin. And when Aidan explains to me that it turns out Khorne Demon Kin can very easily get a 5-up Feel No Pain to both psychic and mortal wounds, I was like, well, that's all of my damage output. So let's see how that goes. So I was already a little bit up against it there, but in all honesty, I think the World Eaters were at the disadvantage. They had a few very large targets. So Aidan's list was a Defiler, a Khorne Lord of Skulls, absolute Chad, a Scarbrand, the Cavalry Brick, and then a upgraded Demon Prince with just like, I think it was like something like 14 or 19 attacks on its sweep that ended up damage 2 with like the perfect Marine killing profile. And I was like, how on earth do they have that? And it's the old trick of like, well, it's only 1 damage as a sweep, but as soon as you find a way to make it 2 damage, that's when havoc starts getting let loose. This was a really interesting game. This was on Dawn of War, so we were quite close to each other, and it was triangulation versus consecration. And to be perfectly honest, I was very confused about the wording at this. We looked at it, discussed it for a while, worked out kind of what it was all about, and then had to do that again because then I got confused. And then as I was setting it up on Tabletop Battles, it then had an extra little bit of here's how you play it. So I felt a little bit better that it wasn't just me that was getting terribly confused at triangulation and consecration. But essentially, because Aidan didn't have the resources to push forward, because he was quite light on resources in terms of having, you know, Scarbrand, the upgraded Demon Prince, the Defiler, the Brick of Mounted Guys, all that kind of stuff. There weren't the trading pieces so much. So there was, I think, like a unit of, what are they called? The infiltrating dudes, and then 20 bloodletters and a few flesh hounds for going around and scoring points. But unfortunately, the Bolter Eradicators were very efficient at dealing with those early units right from my backboard, kind of really being able to use the advantage of being on the Dawn of War deployment to get those angles to then critically take down those targets. And my God, is it efficient when you are shooting those Eradicators into a brick of 10 light infantry. They go down like a stiff breeze. It's insane to see how much damage output they actually bring. But at that point, Aidan's forced to bring out his slightly more relevant stuff, so he brings forward the Khorne Lord of Skulls, brings forward the Defiler. Now, the Sternguard made very short work of the Defiler, even though they weren't in rapid fire range, because I had to be careful where I was setting them up, because I didn't want them to get charged. But then the Infernus Marines didn't quite pop off as much as I would have liked, and only quite badly damaged the Corn Lord of Skulls, even when they were dev wounding and everything like that. Again, that 5-up Feel No Pain to dev wounds really changed the math. So that was very difficult for me to kind of try and work through. But equally, it was a really nice little counterplay and a really nice little meta pick, I thought, that the Khorne Demonkin could provide that to all of these sort of big, tough, stat-checky vehicles. I got quite lucky with an Overwatch into the big mounted unit and took down 3 of them with a Land Raider Redeemer's Overwatch, which is very much not average. I rolled high on the number of shots, and then I rolled well on the wound roll, which kind of neutered the output of that unit. But then some Infernus were able to step up, clean up the rest of that apart from the character, which took away a lot of that big damage output that I was concerned about. And that really helped me kind of control the pace from there. At that point, Scarbrand, out he comes, out the Demon Prince comes, and they kill the 2 units, the Vanguard Vets and the Infernus, that had massively underperformed in the last turn. However, the Vanguard Vets bought me the time and bought me the positioning to allow me to still kind of get back into that game and get that pacing. It was really the Sternguard that took it to the next level with just how killy they were. The Sternguard were able to kill the Defiler, as already mentioned, and then Scarbrand, and then finish off the Khorne Lord of Skulls. They were worth their weight in gold. I was really impressed with just how good they were, and being able to stand them a little bit further back to be able to get that pressure in really helped. So overall, the Vanguard Vets, the Sternguard Vets really proved their value in this matchup. I was really impressed with just how killy they are. They were going into their perfect target, granted, and like this is definitely a favoured matchup specifically for those Sternguard, where there's lots of wound monsters. Obviously, they've got the Feel No Pain, but you output so much damage and you ignore their 4-up invuns, all that kind of good stuff. It just makes life very difficult for your opponent. So the Sternguard really won me that game. And it was, to be honest, again, I kind of ignored the mission and just focused on trying to table Aiden and his World Eaters. And that works. That is how you play 11th edition. I'm more and more convinced every game I play that you forget what mission you're doing and just go and kill your opponent. That is, to be honest, the most important thing that you seem to need to do when it comes to 11th. And I can't lie, I'm quite enjoying it. So at this point, we've played 2 very tough rounds against 2 very skilled, very lovely players. And I'm like, okay, let's hope that we get a little bit more of a restful round 3. But no, of course, we get paired into the stat check of all stat checks. Now, for everyone that is familiar with Tyranids, they will have seen that they got a massive glow up with 11th edition, and that is usually attributed to Talons of the Norn Queen. If you haven't played against these lovely Norn emissaries and assimilators, essentially what they are is massive beefcakes that sit on objectives with 4-up invulnerable saves and 5-up Feel No Pains and 15 OC. So I go into this game looking at this matchup and go, okay, well, this is the true test of the Salamander damage output. Are they able to chunk through these Norns fast enough so that I'm able to exploit the fact that there's not many other units supporting? There was 3 Norns, a couple of Maliceptors, a Hive Tyrant with some Tyrant Guard, and then the Swarm Lord with some Tyrant Guard, and then some support pieces as well. Now, my opponent goes first and decides to put both of these Norns on the center objective, 1 emissary and 1 assimilator. Now, I know that assimilators are able to regenerate wounds if I don't take them down. So it's really critical that I get into them and I finish off each one. So I warn my opponent, look, the damage output for Salamanders is really high. I know you've got all these defensive tricks, and I know you've got a 4-up Feel No Pain strat if you want to. You already have a 5-up Feel No Pain, and you've got a 4-up invuln. However, Salamanders still have a disgusting amount of output. But my opponent, and fair enough to him in this regard, goes, sure, let's see it, and puts the 2 Norns in the middle. I go, okay, well, I mean, I've said it. I'm going to have to try and see if I can actually do it, and I'm going to win or lose the game on that. And it went very well. The Sternguard were able to put the Norn emissary down to very few wounds, at which point the Land Raider Redeemer stepped up and finished it off with its flame cannons with that +1 to wound from Oath, at which point Vulkan points at the other Norn and sends all of the flamers into said Norn, and they pick it up without many problems, which is kind of crazy because I still had 2 damage output bricks waiting in the wings. The Galactic Corridor, we're going to call it. It's not called that, but the Corridor Infernus was still waiting, as were the Vanguard Vets. So I'd not committed all of these resources still, and yet was able to kill 2 Norns, which was brutal. It was kind of one of those where I'm like, okay, this is now my game to lose. There were a few 11-inch charges or so that were able to kind of keep the Nids in the game for a little bit longer, but in all honesty, they connected and just, it felt like they didn't quite have the damage output, especially into a 4-up invuln. Again, why do librarians just give a 4-up invuln? It's insane, which allowed me to really kind of get back, fall back away from those problems and finish them off with lots of guns. Now, critically, the Sternguard were able to take down another Norn alongside the Redeemer taking down a Maleceptor, and then the Corridor Infernus dropped in, dealt with the Hive Tyrant, no, the Swarm Lord. But it's crazy to think that just because the Swarm Lord has the monster keyword, I can fire a bunch of flamers into an ongoing combat. Now, I know we're Salamanders and we love flame, but that feels a little bit weird that, like, I can toast Tyranids with all that chitin shell, but my guys just stand there absolutely fine. Logical. So I'm not really sure if that's something that they might change, but I don't think it will be. We've had it basically for all an edition where it's just blast weapons that can't shoot into combat. So into monsters in combat, all that kind of stuff. But that was a little bit weird to be like, yeah, I'm going to shoot all of these flamers at you, even though you're in combat. But again, Vulkan really showed his hand there and showed just why he deserves that spot in every single list, because having reroll wounds into those tough targets just takes it to the next level, especially when you want to oath somewhere. So your +1 to wound is elsewhere. You can then +1 to wound with a strat elsewhere as well, and Vulkan just supports you with rerolling all those wounds. And at that point, I think it was the end of turn 3, I'd killed basically everything but a Maleceptor. And my opponent, well, we were both pretty tired at that point, but we decided that that was that, and to move on with our lives into day 2. So 3-0 at the end of day 1. Really thrilled with the results. 3 very hard games against really lovely people. Had a really great time. The venue was lovely. It was very warm. We're experiencing a heat wave in the UK at the moment, which was brutal. But we'd managed to get through that, sweated through that, drank lots of water through that, but we were there. Now, when you go into day 2 undefeated, that usually means that you are going to get paired into an absolute beast of a player. And it went no different in my round 4 pairing. So round 4, you might already be able to guess from this image what I was going against, because my God, that is a lot of Kroot. So I was up against Ross Tully, who is well known for his Kroot list and has already taken down both the Beachhead Super Major and the South Coast Super Major with his Kroot. And in fact, he actually beat Salamanders in the final of the South Coast Super Major, so he kind of knew this matchup already. However, the rules have changed. We're in 11th edition now. Could this be the time of the Salamanders? It was, I mean, I didn't count the amount of Kroot. The answer was a lot, and I just had to hope that I could char grill them fast enough that I could get through them. The game did not disappoint. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a laugh from start to finish. It was great just to have that kind of game where you make sure that all the intent is so clear, you just have fun, everything goes the right way it should. And this one was such a nail biter. Now, Ross puts basically his entire army in front of me on turn 1 and goes, how much of this can you kill before I get into you? And I managed to kill, I think it was around 10 of the gorillas, and then a bunch of other carnivores and all that kind of stuff, but there's still a ton of resources coming at me. Now, I have been able to use my scouts to block off the initial infiltrate from some of the crew, which bought me a little bit of space on the Crucible deployment and allowed me to have a little bit of wiggle room. I did the first time I had to start my Vanguard vets on the board rather than rapid ingressing them in, because I was pretty sure that they wouldn't really have anywhere that I could put them. He had two 12-inch deep strike denial units, and I didn't want to risk just having them not really do anything, because they were one of my best output units, and against Kroot, being able to hit 2 units and potentially kill 2 units quite comfortably in one turn, that would be a real difference maker. Now, I knew that my snap shooting would be the other big difference here, where I could try and get as many shots into him as possible. But I end up in Kroot jail, as you would expect, for the first 2 turns. Tons of Kroot just get thrown at me and thrown at me and thrown at me. And all I can do is just desperately try and hit them back with the butts of my flamers, flame them where I can, and take as many of them down as possible. Now, Ross has complete board control for basically his first 3 turns, but critically, everything changes in my 3rd turn. Now, there was a moment at the end of my 2nd turn where Ross asked, "Do you think you might now be up against it?" And at the time, yeah, I thought I was. I thought that I'd probably lost the game at that point. But I was able to focus this new 11th edition trick of going for that end of game scoring. And I mean, that's not overly new, because in 10th edition, you go second, you wait, you jump out on objectives and score lots. Yes, of course. But in 11th edition, if you focus on killing your opponent for the first 3 turns, you can almost guarantee that you're going to score 60 points across those last 2 turns. And that is what won me this game. So, well, actually, specifically not that, but in fact, it was end of game scoring, which is where I got those final few points through. Now, on my turn 3, I was able to finally get my Sternguard into the action, and they killed the very terrifying unit of 10 Kroot carnivores. Yay, go Sternguard. It wasn't really their job to go and kill. What they needed to do was advance and take that center objective, because Recon versus Recover assets is a heck of a matchup for Recon. It's probably our worst one. So I knew I was going to be up against it, and I knew that Ross was going to score very comfortably going through those early turns. So I made sure that I then was eventually able to get those Sternguard in, and I cleared out my left flank, which is where my expansion was, and Ross had been really putting me under a lot of pressure there, even resurrected one of his 20 bricks to go and put them on that flank too. But I just about bought myself the time and bought myself the killing power, where I was able to take down all of these Kroot over on that flank and leave me just having to deal with with my right flank at that point, with a Redeemer still alive. Now, when we got to that 4th turn, it was pretty close on the time, and I was able to just push. I'd killed most of the resources. I think there was maybe 3 units left, because the bolter eradicators had sniped out the stuff at range. The flamers had dealt with all of those key problems. That turn 3 I had killed off all of the carnivores left in front of me and the last of the gorillas, leaving I think maybe 2 left on the entire board, the lone spear and then another squad of Kroot. But my Sternguard were critically in a position where they could run forward and really cause havoc, pushing hard and allowing me to get to that end of the game where I was scoring as many points as possible. Now we get to the end of the game. The score was 81-81. So Russ goes, right, well, it's a draw then, right? And I go, well, I'm not sure if this works, but I'm pretty sure I get 5 points at the end of the game that doesn't count to my primary in turn 5. So we get the ref over, get the head ref over, and he goes, yep, that is how that works. To our understanding, you are able to score those extra 5 points. So essentially, over the last 2 turns, I think I scored 65 points. And there was one point, I think, in turn 2 where it was maybe like 17-37. Now, if that was, no, 39. And if that was a 10th edition game, I've lost at that point. There is no way I come back from that. But because of the change of how pacing works in 11th edition, I was able to go for the throat, kill as many of these models as possible, and then when I have so many resources still, and Ross has not got many, I was able to sneak the win. It was an incredibly close game, and honestly my favourite of all the weekend, probably the hardest as well, and it was just phenomenal. A game that I would happily play 3 or 4 times again to really see what that matchup looks like. It's the game where I felt that I played the best 11th edition game that I'd played all weekend at that point, and it really felt like things were starting to click, which is pretty handy because at that point I was about to go and play for undefeated at the end of a super major, so I kind of needed things to click because otherwise I was in trouble going into that next round. But that one for me was the turning point. That was where I really learnt and was able to go, okay, this is how this works. This is how I need to approach this game going forward. So we sneak past the Croûte with lots of Kentucky Fried Chicken absolutely everywhere. Delightful. I'm sure all the carrion had a great time munching on all the crew and all the very dead salamanders as well, because I lost a heck of a lot of models in that game too. Those gorillas are no joke. And at that point, I'm able to kind of go, okay, I don't know what I'm getting now. I know it's going to be something brutal, but let's see what we've got. And of course, it's everyone's favorite Necrons. Now, Necrons dominated for most of 10th edition, and things have not changed as we go into 11th. Now, yes, there is a bit of jank that they've got as part of Awakened Dynasty with the rezzing and then rezzing the unit, all that kind of thing, but luckily this list was not that, because I think that's the one matchup that Salamanders do really struggle into. I think that's the one where it's like it's near enough their worst matchup, but this one instead was Curse Legion, so the Destroyer Blob one, and then comboed with the Sky Flying Dudes one that really helps destroyers, all that kind of stuff. And this was a tough one. There was 2 Catan involved in there as well, which is never easy to kill. I was kind of excited to see 2 Catan there because I was like, okay, that gives me a really good Sternguard target. And that's exactly what I want. I can see how these Infernus do into Catan now as well. But my opponent deployed very conservatively, lots in reserve, and they had the Night Scythe combo as well, where they drop out the big Destroyer Blob with the Plasmancer. Again, why that is a thing, I do not know, but it is very much a thing, because it just has to be an infantry unit, and the Plasmancer gives them infantry. So this one was going to be tough, because though Necrons do kill Marines very, very efficiently, but as I say, my opponent deployed incredibly conservatively, which allowed me to get good early board control. And looking at the game, if it was 10th edition, I would have won on the spot. But it's no longer 10th edition. This is 11th now. Early board control does not result in wins as much as it used to. And even though I was able to go and steal his home objective, go and then push on into the destroyers behind, all that kind of stuff, I was still up against it because my models were falling over at a very rapid pace. And the first time that my Sternguard went in, they left the Nightbringer on a single wound. And that forced me to then put other resources into him. And unfortunately, I ended up having to spend one of my CP on a grenade to get rid of the Nightbringer, which then stopped me having the 2 CP to be able to dev wound with my Flamers into the Void Dragon. Now, the Void Dragon had got quite unlucky on an Overwatch. I'd been able to put him down to 7 wounds on an Overwatch. So I'd got very lucky there. But then my opponent had rolled really well on their saves for the Nightbringer. And I'd rolled quite poorly, to be perfectly honest, as well, with the amount of dev wounds that I was handing over. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. And especially when those heavy bolters suddenly go down to damage 1, that can hurt the output because sometimes those heavy bolters just delete things. I then had to weather the storm for a turn. I was able to kill the Nightbringer, and I put the Void Dragon down to 1 wound. Killed a bunch of other stuff, took that out of the game, but then the Night Side dropped down with the Destroyer Brick and were able to get into my Sternguard. Now this is where my luck changed a little bit and I was able to high roll quite a few 4-up invulns and only ended up losing 4 guys out of the squad. That is incredibly unlikely when you look at that matchup. They should have absolutely deleted that unit, and I've seen them just cut through things like there's no tomorrow. So I definitely got a little bit lucky to have enough of my Sternguard in the fight where I was then able to push forward and deal with the Void Dragon. Massive props have to go to Vulkan. Vulkan had been put down to 1 wound by the Nightbringer shooting, and then the Nightbringer charged into a Redeemer, got a little bit lucky and killed the Redeemer in a single activation. But then Vulkan just decided to go, no, not today. And even when he was on 1 wound, he just passed every feel no pain. Eventually, he was charged by the Pyromancer brick, bringing it really close to me. And that allowed, well, he did die at this point, unfortunately. But critically, I now had the brick exactly where I wanted it. And I was able to push forward, get my Redeemer into position, because one of my Redeemers had done basically nothing because my opponent had deployed so defensively that the plan of where I wanted to be had kind of worked a little bit against me because I had total board control, but the battle was only really going on in one area of the board. So that was definitely well played by my opponent. But eventually, because of the sheer speed of a Redeemer, especially when it's got Assault, it was able to get in and put those destroyers in the ground. Again, those Flamestorm cannons are just exceptional. Suddenly, everything just switched to that next level, and I was able to finish off the rest of the army and get a small win. But this was a hell of a tough game. And in all honesty, it did show that there are weaknesses to the Salamanders. They can whiff on that damage output, and if they do have a turn where they whiff, as much as they do have that 4-up invulnerable save, they are still quite susceptible to return shooting because they're not overly durable. They are still 2-wound Marines, which has always been my criticism of the 10 Sternguard brick. But right now, with it being in Redeemers to keep it safe for a while, I think it just takes it to that next level. So we get through to the Shadow Round, but unfortunately, because I had to go and get a train, I wasn't able to stay for the knockouts. I felt really good about the knockouts. I was looking at the other lists and was like, I feel pretty confident into most of these. You know, the list that ended up going on to win was a fantastic Thousand Suns list, but because all of those robots become psychic, all of my key units have a 4-up feel no pain to what they're doing. So I would have loved that matchup, and funnily enough, I think that would have been the game that I would have played because 4th would have played into 5th. I was 5th, and I think my the Thousand Suns player was 4th. So would have got that matchup in the first one, which would have been really exciting, and I think I probably could have taken it. But unfortunately, it just wasn't to be because someone hasn't learned how to drive and had to go and get a train home. So slightly gutted, but critically, I learned a huge amount. And now we're going to break it down and see what I would change if I was to play this list again. So overall, I was really impressed with this list. Salamanders are phenomenal. I think that's probably not an overly hot take, no pun intended. Salamanders are very good. Librarius is a very good detachment at 1 DP as well, probably the best 1 DP detachment in the game. But it also gave me access to Recon, which personally I think is probably one of the better dispositions and definitely better for Salamanders than going for Purge the Foe, because Purge the Foe, I feel like you have to pace your killing slightly differently, while as with Recon, I can just go, okay, all out, score later. And that works for me. So I don't think this list does make it past the next slate. I think there'll either be like a cap to the mortal wounds that it can output, because that would make the most sense. Alternatively, it might be points that massively nerf this list. It did feel just too cheap. But right now, it's probably one of the best armies in the game because of how it shapes up into the rest of the meta. Just having that random 4-up feel no pain to Psychic, I think is really good for basically all of the army. It screws Thousand Suns. And Thousand Suns are definitely one of the best armies in the games right now, as shown by Thousand Suns going on to win the whole tournament. So I really think that if this does continue, this is still probably the best way to play Space Marines. Salamanders just felt next level, but in all honesty, I don't think it's going to last. The Vanguard vets, I think, were the only thing that I was somewhat unimpressed with. The way that I was playing them was a little bit more focused on the rapid ingress threat to then go and deal with problems. And I really liked that role. However, they weren't able to take advantage of Vulkan pointing at things as much as I would have liked. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take them out, take out a chaff unit or two, and put in a Terminator Librarian with 10 Terminators. Now, with the Pyrokinesis discipline, that's suddenly like 44 shots at strength 5, AP 1, damage 1, which is pretty damn brutal. Then you've also got the smite, then you've also got the missiles on top as well, which is a lot of firepower to be able to deal with, alongside the fact that then you give something a nice little charge and you power fist it to death. Especially with access to that +1 to wound, suddenly you're really going to go through just about anything very, very easily, especially when we throw into the fact that they're also sustained, because of course, why would they not be sustained? Of course, that's the ability that the Terminator and Librarian army, the Librarian and Terminator armor gives you. It's absolutely nuts. So I'm really excited to do that, but also critically, they've got a 4-up invuln, and that's what I felt the Vanguard vets were missing. Yes, I could have put some more shields on them. I don't think it's worth it. I was very impressed with 4-up invulns throughout the whole weekend, and I think just right now, because of the changes to how cover works, a 4-up invuln is just your best friend. Just some kind of invuln is massively beneficial. So we'll see what happens as we go into the slate. But overall, I think Salamanders are fantastic. And if you are looking forward to playing any kind of Marine, give these guys a go. They are an absolute blast. You're so quick, you're so killy, and you have so many models on the board. It's just a really great, fun way to play Space Marines. I loved it, and I've always had a soft spot for both Salamanders and Redeemers, so this was a really wholesome moment for me. If you want to learn more about how 11th edition needs to play and how you need to approach it going forward, I do also offer coaching, so go check that out at tacticalrock40k.co.uk. And of course, we're going to be doing lots more videos on 11th edition and how the data slate affects you when it comes. So make sure that you're hitting that subscribe and tell me in the comments what you think of the list, how you potentially change it, and what you're thinking about playing as the edition goes on. But most importantly, remember, it is kill first, ask questions later. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this. I've really enjoyed filming it. And remember, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.